If EVs are so good, why does the government need to give subsidies? It's more money wasted poured down the net zero coffers. Why am I being forced into an EV? Well, the media and the armchair hypocrites join forces in pretend outrage. But what is the government really offering, and why are they doing it? I'm Dave. This is Dave Takes It On. OK, what's the government being offered? Well, that's really quite simple. They've set aside a total of about £700 million made up of direct subsidies of up to £3,750 towards the initial cost of a new EV, as long as it's below a list price of £37,000. They're helping the budget end. Then there's additional money for the charging infrastructure growth to continue, and £25 million towards local councils to offer grants to install pavement gullies for those that can park outside but cannot currently install an EV home charger. By the way, if you've previously applied and been refused, apply again. Westminster says they not only must allow you to install them, but they must also force you to offer a grant. But the simple facts of what they are offering totally misses the whole point of why they're doing it. So first, let's have a look at why any government subsidises any industry. And the primary reason is usually just down to jobs. Without this help, an industry would probably collapse and hundreds or maybe thousands would be made unemployed, and the government probably could not survive the fallout. Think recently we heavily subsidised and brought back into private ownership the steelworks at Scunthorpe. It was on the point of going bust, and without the government intervening, it would have gone. And we would have had thousands of unemployed and virtually no homegrown steel industry left. Well, in addition to the buyout, the government advanced a £500 million steel order by Network Rail, and that alone will keep the plant busy making railway tracks for the foreseeable future. So before anyone shouts about EV subsidies, just realise that subsidies are an integral part of the UK business scene. Give you an idea, have you heard of South Western Railway? Well, that was another privatised company that failed, and the government took that back into state ownership in order to continue offering a service to the public and retaining thousands of jobs. You can go way back to, British Leyland, DeLorean, Nissan, JLR, Ford, BMW, Vauxhall. In fact, it's probably quicker to list those motor companies that have never had nor asked for any subsidies. And these are not EVs, these are not EV manufacturers, these are your good old-fashioned ICE legacy motor companies. See, I find it strange that I don't remember any of you shouting and screaming about subsidies for them. You suddenly lost your voices? Well, subsidies are commonly used to save an industry from collapse and failure. In the case of EVs, this is most definitely not the case. Every single year since they were first launched, sales of EVs have increased, and today 1 in 4 new cars sold is an EV. This is not the case of an industry collapse. Sorry all of you out there who wish it were. So why are subsidies being offered, and why now? Well, first it's worth looking at how the media reports these subsidies, and that's very telling. How about the oil industry that makes your precious petrol and diesel? This new announcement is for £700 million to support EV adoption, but what about the reported £17.5 billion in grants, subsidies and tax breaks given every single year pumped into the oil giants? What's that, severe laryngitis? Isn't it strange that the media and some activist groups get us all wound up about 700 million EV subsidies, beating our chests, marching the streets, but just totally keep quiet about the oil giants' £17.5 billion a year forever? Not a mention. Why do we fall for it? So subsidies are here, have always been, and will always likely to be here as part of the economy. What other reasons do government use subsidies for? Well, the next reason is to get us to do something that we probably wouldn't do without them. They could use the law, as they did over half a century ago, when they made the wearing of seatbelts compulsory. They tried everything. They begged, they pleaded, they did jazzy adverts, clunk-click every trip, but we ignored the lot of them. And in the end, they realised even bribing us wouldn't achieve the targets they set. That was to get everyone to wear a seatbelt. So they passed a law. And we wore seatbelts. Well, at least 99.9% of sane, sensible people do to this day. Well, the direct opposite to a subsidy is to make something law. Don't pay us, force us. They couldn't find a way to bribe us to wear seatbelts, so they made it law. That law is like a massive sledgehammer, plenty big enough to tackle most things, but it still has limitations. Legislation has its place in modern economics, but needs to be used sparingly. Now, going back, on paper, EVs should have been seen by the UK population as a massive leap forward and needed no help whatsoever. Next generation cars, futuristic looking, features only dreamed of with ICE versions, no more dependency on fickle oil companies and fuel prices that spiral out of control at the first mention of war or shortage, no exhaust pipes, so no more emissions of any sort. Best of all, for more than half the population who can charge at home, it meant they could charge up overnight while they slept at ridiculously cheap off-peak rates, making motoring a fraction of the cost of what they were used to. No more £60 tankfuls of petrol. Now it's a £5 for a full battery. And even if you need 2 of those to get the same mileage, it's still only a tenner. What is there not to like? But here politics and economics joined forces to try very, very hard to destroy the EV industry before it even got going. Campaigns immediately began lambasting EVs. They catch fire. They only do 100 miles. They take 2 hours to charge. Children dig cobalt out of the ground with their bare hands. There are no chargers. And it was not just the legacy auto industry that was a threat. It was the massive oil industry. See, no more petrol engines would mean no more petrol needed. And that would never be allowed. Never in a million years. OPEC, those really rich, obscenely rich Arabs and oligarchs and dictators that ruled countries that had oil underneath their feet, they would never even consider packing up and going home, muttering, well, it was good while it lasted. For the auto industry, it would mean that all of the old, outdated, inefficient factories employing tens of thousands of workers would just become worthless overnight. And that would be a double blow to them. First, for the last 100 years, they'd made a fortune out of making these old, inefficient, polluting cars. Now, when I say they, I don't mean the workers. They were ignored. They were often on very low wages, had long working hours. They had to strike repeatedly to try and get the bosses to pay anything like a decent living wage. No, I meant the bosses made a fortune. You see, the majority of the legacy auto industry is bankrupt in all but name. Take VW Group. On paper, owns over 100 factories, makes a good profit, makes loads of cars. But that's not the whole truth. You see, that's accountancy for you. In reality, VW in 2024 owed over 250 billion euros. The debt's growing rapidly. Turns over only 325 billion, and the declared profits made after huge sums were split between the major shareholders in dividends and executives in bonuses was less than 19 billion euros. Less than previously, and that decline's accelerating. In Q1 2025, that profit shrank a further 37%. That is not a happy, healthy company. The last thing they needed was for someone to tell them what they had been always making and what they still made was now over, like Kodak film. And they would need to scrap all the factories and production machinery and start again with EVs. And so a massive negative campaign was built that was intended to finish off this fledgling upstart EV industry. They almost succeeded by using outright lies, exaggerations, myths, fears, half-truths and wild rumours. And the people responded by swallowing it all, hook, line and sinker. See, left on its own, the EV industry would have grown slowly alongside the ICE industry and gradually taken over. But that's the fantasy. See, while not everyone wanted an EV, those that did would have just gone out and bought one. Not everyone can charge at home, but those that could, they would have enjoyed the cheap motoring. Buyers would have made genuine choices as to the best vehicle for them, free from fear, myths, lies, and massive negative media machine. So, faced with this unprecedented backlash and campaign, sales still did take off and continue to do so. But the EV industry is a fraction of what it would have been without that negative campaign. And if the government wanted the transition to EVs to succeed, then it needed to step in. But why does it want the UK to transition to EVs in the first place? After all, the old legacy auto was doing somewhat all right. Well, reasons are twofold. The first one is pollution, second is greenhouse gases. Now, I am correct in saying that nobody will deny the pollution argument. Ella Adu Kissy Deborah is officially recorded as having died from asthma brought on by the air pollution caused mainly by the internal combustion engine exhaust pipes. And not just from motors. We also get countless deaths each year from carbon monoxide, from faulty gas-fired central heating systems. It's what they call the silent killer. You see, burn anything, it produces pollution, and most emissions from burning fossil fuels contain numerous lethal, toxic, carcinogenic chemicals, gases and particles that cripple us first and then kill us quickly or slowly. Is anyone brave enough out there to stand up and say they want more of these? So faced with a growing problem of pollution, the majority caused by vehicle exhaust pipes, governments all around the world finally reacted. They'd already done so back in 1952 when a severe smog lasting just 4 days caused the death of around 4,000 people in one single event. Clearly, that was unacceptable. Something had to be done. We then eventually got the Clean Air Acts in 1958 and another in 1968 that banned coal in favour of smokeless fuels. But coal was already on its way out, with North Sea gas arriving and domestic central heating taking over. The boiler flues produce the pollution now. And cars also began to increase in staggering numbers until their combined pollution was almost as bad as the smogs we thought we'd left far behind. Well, the government was forced to step in to legislate. Instead of burning smokeless fuels that produce less pollution, the new EV offered zero pollution at source. EVs do not have exhaust pipes. Well, if one day every single driver could transition onto this new EV, then the airborne pollution plaguing our cities and motorways from petrol and diesel cars would gradually just fade away. But of course, that was all without the anti-EV oil and legacy auto opposition. They put a stop to all of that. They turned the EV auto industry into a pariah. We still bought EVs, and in ever-increasing numbers as people with an open mind tried one and found, yeah, it works. But by far the majority just swallowed hook, line and sinker the negative scare stories and lies and avoided them. Despite every single EV having by law to guarantee the batteries for 8 years, just last week I was asked what I would do when the battery needed replacing in a couple of years. Hook, line and sinker. Blind acceptance. The media say the batteries only last 2 years. They must only last 2 years. But meanwhile, Legacy Auto made bigger and more powerful ICE cars to try and tempt the buying population to stick with petrol. And instead of a nice steady transition to EVs, we got a massive increase in airborne pollution as the bigger, heavier ICE cars pumped out ever more pollutants. The problem was actually getting worse. So legislation was finally needed to replace a nice, gentle, orderly transition that would have given legacy automakers plenty of time to run the ICE and the EVs together side by side and allowing the buying public to choose. But that legislation in the form of the EV mandate was like throwing petrol onto a fire. The oil giants and Legacy Auto dug in, and they fought tooth and nail to try to destroy this legislation that forced them to go EV. over a period of time. And the gullible public joined in with barely a thought in the world. Here's a question. Do they want their own children and grandchildren to suffer the same agonising, painful, premature death at the age of 9 as little Ella did in London a couple of years back? I find that incredibly hard to believe, but they fought Clean Air Acts, they fought low emission zones and all other attempts to reduce pollution with a vengeance, taking to the streets in huge numbers in mass rallies to keep pollution at a dangerously high level that was affecting the health of every single member of the public, their own families, their own children. Really? I find that almost impossible to believe. So government used legislation to force us to look at EVs. Not force us to buy them, just look at them. Anyone today can still buy a pure petrol car. Will be able to do so for the next 10 years. And because cars last around 15 years before ending up on the scrap heap, that means they can drive around in the petrol cars for at least the next 25 years. But still they fought back tooth and nail. Now, with such opposition, the government was faced with a choice. They either give in to pollution, just allow us all to drive what we want, allow industry to do whatever it wants, produce as much pollution it wants, at whatever cost that is to the nation's health, or they could fight back, and it was no contest. That's why, whatever the public outcry or outrage or claims of denial of freedom and all the like, exhaust emissions must end one day, full stop, and soon too. With a perfectly good alternative in the form of EVs for well over half of the UK population, it's eventually going to win through anyhow. It's a losing battle to fight it, like it was back in 1952 when the smogs killed us, or in 2024 when the last of the coal-fired power stations shut down in the UK. The future has to be zero pollution, or as close to it as we can get. And in the problems with the overstretched NHS, the primary cause for the emissions these days are all related to airborne pollution. The chemicals, gases and other bits and pieces in the exhaust pipes cause asthma, allergies, bronchitis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, short-term irritations, respiratory issues, cardiovascular problems, brain disorders, cognitive decline, dementia, stunted lung growth, behavioural problems in children, and cancers. The children and elderly are particularly disproportionately prone. Well, that's quite some list. Please remember that list when you next choose to go out and fight to close down a low-emission zone in your nearby city. Well, subsidies then are the government's way to get more people to look at EVs and make a sensible, rational decision. If they make EVs cheaper, more buyers will look at them. They're not stupid. EVs at present are not for everyone. Everybody knows that. It's not a secret. But nobody expects everybody to swap this year. What the government's doing with subsidies is just making more people look at them. The rest of it is up to the buyers and the industry. We have today almost 35 million petrol and diesel cars. And according to the government, 60% of all the UK houses could have an EV and charge it at home at a ludicrously cheap price. That's about 20 million cars. No forcing, no compulsion. Just let them look at EVs with an open mind and allow this transition to continue, and it will. But this is where we find the real agenda. If you personally don't want an EV, can't make it work for you, absolutely fine. Don't buy one. Go and buy a petrol car. It's fully legal. Nobody's going to stop you. Nobody's going to criticise you. So why do you now feel the overwhelming urge or compulsion to stop others for whom an EV might suit them better from making their own choice and buying one? See, that's the killer. This is nothing to do with freedom of choice. This is a campaign that is committed to totally destroy the EV industry or die in the attempt. The bad actors in this play, they're out to stop us EV buyers from having that freedom of choice, from being able to choose what suits us best, from being able to spend our own money on whichever car we choose to buy. They want to control us, and that is why the government is doubling down now and offering the subsidies. It's not to get everyone to switch tomorrow. That'll never happen. We only sell about 2 million new cars a year, so the whole process is going to take many years yet. But to allow those that want to have an EV, those for whom an EV works and offers the best balance, a bigger reason to do so. We already see that trend. BEV sales are up 39% in June 2025 this year. That's 100% electric vehicles, BEVs, not hybrids. But the government wants to transition even faster so they can free up more NHS hospital beds and save more lives. So a new subsidy is on the way, worth up to around £3,750 per EV, as long as it's below 37,000. That total subsidy value, around 700 million, is just 1/25 of what the oil industry gets each year. It's trivial in the scheme of government funding, but it sends a vital message. It does not say go out and buy an EV and nothing else. It merely says have a look at EVs when you buy your next vehicle and choose what suits you best, because EVs really are here to stay. They are the future. But what about the 40% of homes that cannot allow charging at home? Well, that also is in this subsidy. There are millions who live in flats, apartments and houses with no off-street facility. Many of them can actually park directly outside their homes or very nearby, but cannot bridge that gap between the house electricity supply and the EV, which is 20 feet away. There's a pavement in between. And a number of ridiculous, pathetic councils still claim that a professionally installed cable gully is a danger to pedestrians and places a total ban on them. Yet those same councils allow cable tray ramps at outdoor events and pop concerts. Those are potential trip hazards and make life very difficult for the disabled. They're often the same councils who fell for the lie that all EVs catch fire and kill people and therefore they should ban them from public car parks and hospital and office car parks. Well, a bit of advice: if you've already applied to your council and they have previously refused you permission, you need to get back in touch, and you need to point out that central Westminster government is now paying councils grants to install these. They should now be legal for all those for whom a cable gully is viable. Now, it doesn't help those living in high-rise flats, but there is help on the way for them too. It's just not yet. If you want to find out more about that, by the way, and what will soon be on offer, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell. Well, 25 million is on offer in the form of grants to those wanting to have a professional cable gully installed. If they previously turned you down, apply again. And if you turn them down this time, get in touch with your local MP. They are now Flavour of the Month, and if your council is out of step, someone there needs a sharp rap on the knuckles. They are legal, they are promoted by Westminster, and they are very, very affordable. Well, having lived in a terraced house with no off-street parking myself, and with Jonas currently living in one, I'm fully aware you cannot always park directly outside your own home every time. Always? Yeah, I agree. But never, no, I don't agree. The media are the first to jump on this and claim, once again, a lie. It will be impossible to use as you cannot guarantee to park directly outside your home, your own house, every single day. But are you aware that an average EV will only need charging once a week? Yeah, once a week, preferably overnight. Once a week you need to park outside your own home and plug it in. What? You can't even do that? Well, you need to choose OVO Energy. That's one of these EV tariffs. They allow cheap rate charging 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Whenever you can, day or night, plug it in, charge, and it'll always be at the cheap rate. The other 6 days and nights you can park anywhere you can, even the next street. You need one time once a week. Or are you going to claim even that's impossible? I bet you are. You're going to claim you can't still park outside your home even once a week. So all you need to do is wait a year or two. And the first of the EVs, with the advanced technology, will have a range of over 600 miles. And they'll be here at affordable prices. That will mean parking outside your home just once a month. Go on, I dare you say you can't even do that. Now, this subsidy will boost sales a little. just for the value. Every little helps, but it sends a very much stronger psychological signal. EVs are here to stay. We're supporting them. And that is going to be the decider. More EVs are arriving all the time, cheaper ones too, as we import heavily from China. No, they're no longer cheap and nasty. They're right up there with the best. No, a £20,000 Chinese EV will not match a £60,000 Mercedes. Don't be ridiculous, but it will vastly exceed a £20,000 UK, European or Japanese EV. Hands down. Well, this and previous governments are now firmly committed to the full transition to EVs. That's it. Nothing's going to stop that. With or without subsidies, one day the people will discover that, hey, an EV is actually quite a good alternative to yet another overpriced petrol car that costs a fortune to run. Now, deadlines may vary as campaigns build or fall in strength, but slowly people, just ordinary buyers, will discover that an EV is actually a good fit for them. They'll also discover that all the old myths and lies are just that. Battery life? Don't care, they all come with an 8-year, 100,000-mile warranty. Anyway, never keep my cars that long. Battery fires? Has nobody heard the new Chinese laws that make all batteries that they manufacture impossible to combust, even if you puncture it, cut it, bend it, hack it or nail it? No chargers? There are already more chargers than petrol pumps, and while each petrol pump currently supplies 218 cars, each EV charger currently serves less than 10 cars. Takes an hour to charge? Don't be daft. They definitely haven't looked at BYD, who is soon to launch an EV with a 1,000-mile range that recharges in 5 minutes. The list of busted lies and myths is endless, but one day those who simply refuse to even look at one, they're just going to run out of reasons. Maybe then they will allow us that like EVs to choose the one that we want to drive. I'm Dave.